Hi, my name is Francisco Valentín. Today I'm going to share with you a series of live experiences I had with death, near death, out of body, and spirit communication with the other side. So here's my story. It all started one summer day, 1979, when at the young age of barely turning 18, and due to a fatal car crash, I died. If you see the image of the car, I was in the driver's seat, and the driver door ended up by the center console of the car. All I can remember is being in the driver's seat. I have to admit, we were young and foolish, and I was speeding. And when I lost control of my car, I froze. And when I mean I froze, it means that I stepped my foot on the accelerator. I did not let go. I held the steering wheel very tightly as I froze. When I lost control of the car and I hit the median, and I will never forget the impact of the car frame hitting the median as I catapulted to the opposite lane. And when I jumped to the opposite lane, I sidewiped another car, which made me spin. And when I stopped spinning, I got hit from the side. The last thing I remember is this movement here as I received the impact. And that's when I went into the void. When I say the void, I don't mean the void up there in the cosmos like some people believe. It's the void where nothing exists. There's nothing around, total darkness, total emptiness. And I was in the midst of that environment without a physical body. I knew that I was me. I knew that I was myself. I didn't turn into anything else. And I realized that I was myself all alone. As I was myself and I was in the midst of all this, I asked myself 3 questions. Who am I? Where I came from? What am I doing here? And I don't recall having received any answer, not at least not at that point. When suddenly I saw, and when I say I saw, I don't mean that I saw with my physical eyes, and it's not something that you can understand as being seeing something. It's just the way perception works in such a way that you can interpret, so you can put it into words, so you can register it in your human mind. And that perception of seeing something is the one that made me look at that dim light as it started approaching me. And as that dim light approached me, I began to realize that there was something within that light, and it was more than one. As that light started approaching me, and let's say that I'm here, it began to swirl around me in a clockwise way. And I realized that at that moment, I was being surrounded by what many can call spiritual beings. And they gave me a peace and love, but I rather call it peace, because love is conditional. Even when someone said, oh, this is unconditional love, no, it's conditional. So I rather call it peace. And it's a peace that have no definition. There's no way that I can express or compare or give any analogy that will everyone who has had a near-death experience has to agree with me. It cannot be explained. And while I was in that peace, I remember wanting to see one of those entities surrounding me. I mean, this is the curiosity within oneself. And at that moment, I turned myself to trying to see that figure. And then I realized that there was like kind of a face which I could not describe, but we made contact. It was an awareness. It was an acknowledgement that we're here. When suddenly I felt a higher presence. I want to call higher presence because it was like a cloud that overtook everything around me, including those beings that were swirling around me. And it was a magnificent power. Magnificent is in a nice way, in a good way. But it was a presence that I never wanted to call it God. And the last thing I remember when suddenly I felt myself getting into like a funnel, getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And as it kept getting narrower, I began to feel the body ache. And it became so unbearable, in which at that point, I just couldn't take it anymore because of the intensity of the pain. I took my first breath, opened my eyes, and someone was taking me out of my car. Just to give you a point of reference, the accident took place around 4 p.m. and I was rescued at approximately 6 p.m. and I did not get to the hospital to surgery until 9 p.m. Okay, after surgery, I went into the intensive care unit for 3 days. I stayed in the hospital for 30 days and it took me 3 months before I could walk again. For those interested in what happened in my physical body, I have multiple fractures on my pelvic bone. A metal strip from the driver's side broke and pierced through my ribs. I had multiple fractured ribs. That metal strip pierced my lung, making it collapse. It shattered my spleen beyond repair, and it punctured my kidney, plus all the internal trauma and bleeding. After my recovery, when I tried to explain what happened to me, I was immediately shut down by my family, my friends, society, my culture, religion. I was born and raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school all my life. And the only person that really listened to me was my mother, who claimed that the moment she saw me, I kept saying constantly how beautiful it was on the other side and that I didn't want to come back. I don't remember any of that, but I believe my mother. And she listened to me, but she had very little to say. So that's when I took upon myself, you know what? I'm going to take it to myself and take it to the grave. And that's when I took the liberty on my own to start reading every single book I could get a hold of, because I was trying to find that spark to help me remember what I never forgot or what I couldn't put into words. Let me remind you that that was back in 1979. There was no internet. The only thing that we could have back then was a public library and a few bookstores. But I was able to get a hold of a few books trying to find what I could not get. So here's lesson number 1. Don't believe everything that you read. And I kept on with my life. I got married. I raised 3 beautiful children, and life was good and dandy until one day. The day was July 7, 2011, when approximately at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, a spirit of light manifested through my 20-year-old son's voice to remind me of an agreement that took place in 1979 in return for my life. What happened to me was that day I was with my 20-year-old son at the time, and he was on school break, summer break. My wife happened to be traveling from work, and my youngest daughter, she was studying abroad, and she stayed out for about a couple of weeks. And I was having time alone with my 20-year-old son. That evening, we had our favorite meal. We have good conversation. And when it was time to call it the night, I told my son, "Good night, my son." I gave him the usual hug. And at that moment, my son said, "Wait, Dad, hold on a second. I want you to listen to a piece of music that I love to listen because it relaxes me a lot." I was kind of tired, but something compelled me to say, "Sure, why not? So let me go to the restroom and I'll be back." Okay. So I went to the restroom, and when I came back, I already heard from distance that he already had his music on in his laptop. And as I approached his room, I just stood up at the door frame because I saw him against the wall on the opposite wall, and he was with his eyes closed and moving his head rhythmically. I didn't get it into the room at that moment when suddenly he said, "Look, Dad, how beautiful. I can see orbs all over the place. It is so beautiful." And that's when it caught my attention, because how can you be seeing that with your eyes closed? You're moving your head rhythmically and you're not supposed to know that I'm already here at the door frame. So I approached him to confirm, and yes, indeed, he has his eyes closed, telling me that. And then he said, "But we are one." And at that moment, I thought that he was making a joke on me or something like that. And I said, "What do you mean we're one?" And that's when his voice turned unemotional, and he said, "Because we're one." I still thought at that point that he was making a prank of me or something like that. And I asked, "And how did it all begin?" And then he started answering that question in a way that I couldn't get a straight answer. So I shifted to ask the same question in another way. but I still was getting the same answer. And I tried it again, and I was still getting the same answer. What I was trying to do is get my son to get him out of balance so he can say, haha, I fooled you, or something like that. I was just trying to see if I can, but I didn't dare to touch him. I don't know why I didn't. But then I realized that his answers were on point, and my son didn't have that knowledge, or at least the knowledge that I had of things from beside the religious beliefs that we implanted in them for being Catholics. And that's when I realized that I was not talking to my son, that I was talking with something or someone more advanced, more powerful, something that I could not understood. But I just kept asking questions and I kept getting answers. So I kept asking up to the point that I realized that as I was formulating the next question in my head, I was already getting the answer. And that really bugged the heck out of me. And that's when I burst in courage and I said, so what am I doing here? And let me remind you that my son was sitting down. I was all the time standing up. And at that moment, when I asked, what am I doing here? That's when my son stood up, turned towards me, opened his eyes, and very energetically, he said, don't you remember that you and I agreed to come down here for you to help me do my job? Then he closed his eyes, turned around, sat down, and began to move his head rhythmically. And that's when I just surrendered, because that was beyond me. One last word that entity told me before it departed stuck on my head up to today. Because I said after that, I was still kind of confused. And I said, do I have to go through all this trouble to help you? And it replied, it's part of it. We are one. And as you help me, you advance. When everything was finished and done, I asked my son, do you remember what just happened? And he said, yes, I remember every bit of it. And I asked, so what do you make of it? I said, I don't know. It just happened. Later on, I asked him, do you remember when you stood up and you told me, no, I don't remember that part. So imagine the energy that that entity must have had to put my son to the side, to stand up, open his eyes, and tell me directly to me the message that I was about to receive. And that's something that I will never forget, neither will my son. The following morning, I woke up with this urge to write, but I'm not a writer and I don't like writing and that's not my thing. But I felt compelled to open my laptop and to write something. And as I opened my laptop and I start typing, not knowing where to start, that's when I realized that I was typing verbatim what took place that evening, the day before, word by word by word. To be honest with you, I have to call this automatic writing because I do not have that ability to write, neither the ability to recall every single word as I did in that moment. The following evening and subsequent evenings, I began to wake up between 1 and 3 a.m. in the mornings to, let's say, download information that was so easy for me to understand, yet so complex, but I understood every single bit of it. Because what I was receiving was like the intent rather than the thought. And I started writing them down. But because I was too sleepy, I just chose to start recording. And that's when I realized much later that I was learning everything from within. And every single night I kept doing the same thing until the moment that I said, I cannot take this anymore. You have to, whatever it is that is talking to me, we need to make something out because I cannot, I'm going to be burned. And we shifted to daytime, and then that's another story later on. But at a given point, I asked, if you're gonna be channeling, you want to know who you're channeling. So I asked, who are you? What is this that I'm doing? What is this thing that is happening to me? Who are you? Who am I channeling? And the answer that I received was these specific words: Name-calling limits the source through reasoning. Rather say that it comes from the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. Notice the peculiarity of those words, kind of not easy to understand because it can be put in different wording to make it easier to understand, but that's the way it came out. Let me explain. Name calling. If I am called by one name, let's say Archangel Michael, for example, if I get this name, I am the source. I will be limiting myself through the reasoning that you will have from what that archangel might be talking about. In other words, if I give him that name, an archangel will not be talking about reincarnation. Therefore, name calling limits the source through reasoning. Then I ask, in another occasion, I ask, what is higher truth? I mean, I keep saying to myself about higher truth, but I really don't know what higher truth means. I know that I'm getting this information and I know that it's higher truth, but I don't have a definition for higher truth. So what is this? And that's when they took me. And when I say they, is because I learned to recognize that it's more than one who bring this information forward. So I was taken back through a flash of memory recall to my days when I was in first grade. And they put me in this position exactly the very same day my first grade math teacher said, "Class, today you're going to learn the foundations of all the numbers. Today you're going to learn to count from 1 to 10. So I memorized those 10 numbers from 1 to 10 to recite it at class the following day. And I did it flawlessly. But deception came in the following day when the teacher said, "Class, today we're going to learn to count from 10 to 20. That's when I said, wait a minute. So what was it that's higher truth? First, I needed to learn to count from 1 to 10 before I could learn to count from 10 to 20. The basic of all the numbers was a misunderstanding because I did not know that higher truth. And higher truth gets you from point A to point B, then to point C. In other words, I needed to learn to count numbers before I could learn to add and subtract, before I could learn to divide and multiply, before I could get to algebra. That is higher truth. One step closer to the ultimate truth. Then I asked, how am I going to call this, all this information that I'm getting? And I got this image of a very old parchment. I mean, old as old can be. And the word transcript came about. Today, I am the transcriber of the transcript, which are insights of higher truth that I receive from a group of what I might call ascended masters regarding the purpose and origin of life, as I receive, proceed, and transcribe from those who rather be called the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom, with one difference, and is that the message is coming forward without theological ties this time around. Therefore, before I go, I'm going to leave you with a message that I was asked by this group of collective forces to share with you as the foundation of the transcripts and what we need to understand from the very beginning. And it reads as follows. If we ever understand that we are one infinite mind, endlessly expanding through the physical and spiritual realm, limitless, then we will understand that the physical world is only an illusion. Let me explain this through a little bit of higher truth. And I repeat, if we ever understand that we are one infinite mind, it doesn't mean that I am one infinite mind and you are one infinite mind and he is one infinite mind and she is an infinite mind. It means that we all are one infinite mind, endlessly expanding through the physical and spiritual realm, limitless. As one infinite mind, therefore, we're one. And that's my message for today. I leave you with that. Thank you for sharing time with me, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.